Hello, welcome to the Cinema Savvy Movie Podcast, the channel for film reviews, discussions, and everything in between. I'm Chris Garner, joined with my co-host George Aldridge, and today is another edition of our Film Club Review Show, which is our small and midweek show where we basically review whichever movie was nominated by either of us at the end of our main show. On today's edition of Film Club, we're going to be bringing you our review on Roland Emmerich's 1996 sci-fi disaster movie Independence Day. George, this was one of your picks for the main show from this week. So before we get into our review, just give a few reasons why you picked it and what the links were from the main show.
Well, I think one of the first reasons was just like Fruitvale Station, which made it more interesting. And none of us have seen this film properly. We've both seen the famous clips. Then the main link was literally we can pick a blockbuster ever. There's 30, 40 years worth of films, and I think with this one, it's kind of got the reputation where it's a film that I maybe should have seen. It's just one of them where I think like literally everyone, especially Americans, have seen this and love it. And it's one of them. Finally, I watched it. And looking into it, it was a massive hit, and literally you can't really put it into words compared to 1996's box office ratios.
Yeah, and this film's a weird one in that how it's treated and how like certain shots in the movie are like shown like all the time, and everyone knows the shot of the White House blowing up and stuff like that. It's almost touted as like one of the best movies ever made in that you have to see it because it's so iconic. But it's just it's just your run of the mill summer blockbuster explosions disaster movie, really, isn't it? And obviously like the 90s itself, like around this time, it went through that whole disaster movie phase. You had Dante's Peak, you had Twister, I think did Volcano come out? It was like there was a whole Deep Impact as well. There was like a whole slew of like these kind of films that came out. But as I say, this is probably the most well known and most iconic, I guess, out of all of them. So as I say, it was directed by Roland Emmerich, who's gone on to have I don't think we'd say great career, but he's done a lot of disaster movies. He brought out 2012. I think he followed this movie up with Godzilla as well, the Matthew Broderick one, which wasn't a great movie. This was his second movie. This was following his first film, which was Stargate, which is a film I haven't seen. This came out in 1996, and it currently is the 47th highest grossing movie of all time. I think when it was done on a budget of about 75 mil, and it made about 817 baht, which for that time was that's an outrageous amount of money. So this is one that audiences really like. As you said, like everyone seems to have seen this, especially Americans. It's a very patriotic movie, so we better get patriotic in this review when we talk about it. But as I said, like for both of us, this was one that we just hadn't seen, and I think part of my reason for me not seeing it personally was I knew everything that had happened. It's sort of like Star Wars in the respect where people sort of just grow up around it and just know of it. Like I'd seen all the famous shots. I knew about the White House blowing up. I knew the bit with the dog where it just dodges the explosion, and like everything like that. I knew exactly what the film was going to be, and if I'm going to give my initial impressions on it now, I sort of enjoyed it, but it's not one I'll ever go back and watch again. It was exactly 100% how I expected it to be, so there were no surprises in this one.
Yeah, and I think me seeing it as well, it was one of them where, it's got the reputation, okay, let's see how it is. I mean, not really similar to be fair, but it's kind of like, before I saw Terminator 2, I knew the reputation, I knew, this is the action film, and when I came up to Terminator 2, seeing it the first time, I was like, you know what, yeah, that is fair play. Same with Mad Max Fury Road, if you're looking at recent ones. Whereas Independence Day, I watched it, and I came out, I was like, yeah, I mean, I liked it, I don't dislike, I don't love it. I think, 1990s, this is a very good action film, a nice blockbuster in the sense that you can sit back, relax, and watch let hell happen. But it's one of them, and I was kind of thinking, it's like, it's not all that though. There's the speech, which we'll go into more detail, which I really, really liked, and I like a few of the characters. But when I'm seeing all this hype around the second one, I'll go into that far more. But it's like, I'll watch the second one, but am I gonna like be there at midnight, like go mental, like probably 3/4 of America? No, I won't be.
Yeah, and I think when the second one rolls out, as I said, like we'll talk about this more towards the end of our review, but they are going to be very smart with which day they bring this film out on. So you know it's going to make loads, and it might be another sort of Jurassic World sort of situation where it's a sequel to a film that's, well, it'll be 20 years old, won't it, at this point, or more than that. But we'll talk about this one more now. So the plot, for anyone that doesn't know, it's an incredibly basic plot. Aliens pick a fight with Earth and want to destroy the world, and humanity fights back. That's essentially the plot, and this obviously all happens on America's Independence Day. So right there, the plot, it's, that sets that sets the stage for your sort of run of the mill, big studio, big loud disaster flick, and sort of how I would sum this entire film up in one sentence is the best Michael Bay film, not directed by Michael Bay. I think you can see a lot of sort of similarities where Michael Bay's sort of taken this style and like ran with it, and I think that he probably saw this movie and was like, oh, shit, I wish I could have made that movie. But you talked about the characters just a minute ago, and I think we should just jump straight into the review with the characters, because unlike other like Michael Bay films, this is very similar to. I really quite enjoyed the characters in this, actually, all of the supporting cast, and what's interesting about this film is that although he's top billing and he's talked about the most probably with this film with Will Smith, I wouldn't really say he's the main character. But then again, when I try and think about it, I don't know who I would say is the main character. You've got Bill Pullman, who plays the U.S. president. You got Will Smith, who's sort of like a pilot and in the military, and then you've got Jeff Goldblum as well. So I would say that sort of between the three of them, these are your three leads, and they just sort of all merge together. There isn't any sort of outright lead character, I don't think.
No, and that's, in all honesty, that's what I liked about. I mean, when you think of Independence Day, I knew there was literally going into. I knew there was the president's speech. I knew Jeff Goldblum's in it. I know that Will Smith's, to quote, the top dog. And then I thought they were really equal. If anything, Bill Pullman was in it more, because I was kind of waiting for Will Smith, and then it took me like 15 minutes to realize. I was like, oh shit, Will Smith's actually in this film. I'd completely forgotten until they show him, because he's
Yeah,
really not in it at the start. It's the other people's film, not his. And then, in all honesty, I'm going to see it in 1996. Fresh Prince is massive. Will Smith is massive. He's gold just at the box office. And I thought, in all honesty, he's the sort of egotistical guy that would be demanding more screen time. But in all honesty, it didn't seem that way. But
yeah,
I did like him in it, and I like the fact that it was a bit different to the kind of standard '90s Will Smith, where okay, he had a few quippy, cocky lines, but it wasn't. This is Will Smith. This is my film for 2 hours.
yeah, and I mean, around this time, this was, as you said, like around the time he was sort of the big leading man to be in a film, and I don't know if he can still really hold that title in today's day. We'll have to see how well what's it called, Suicide Squad is when that comes out. But this was when he was in his prime. This was when he was at his A game. I just checked actually, because there's a film with Will Smith in that came out in the '90s which I actually really love. It's like a guilty pleasure of mine, Wild Wild West, but that came out 3 years after this. This was very much when he was at the forefront in films, and as I say, like the character he plays in this, he does the role well, and I do think that the second one will suffer without him being in it, although he isn't the lead character. Instead of him, we've got Liam Hemsworth, which seems like a really sort of cheap swap for those two actors. But Will Smith just does what he does best in this film. He's sort of the brash, arrogant leading man. He gets a few awesome one-liners. In fact, he gets probably my favourite line in the movie, favourite scene in the movie, is where the alien UFO crashes. And it's the scene everyone knows. He goes up to it, it opens up, the alien comes out, he punches it in the face, whips out a cigar, and he says, "Welcome to Earth," or something like that, and it's brilliant. So those moments like that, but even like Bill Pullman, and I'm trying to think of other films I've seen Bill Pullman in. I think the only one I've seen him in is Casper, the Christina Ricci one, and I really liked him in that. But he was awesome, and you were saying like earlier, like that speech he delivers, it's so like oorah Murica moment, but it's just epic.
Yeah, and I love that speech. And then, oh, sorry, I don't live it. Sorry, I'm not American. I can't say that. I really liked it. I mean, I knew everything. I'd seen it quoted on movie fights or anything like that, and when it got to it, I was kind of like, not goosebumps in a pathetic way, but it was quite like you sit up and you're listening more and thought, you know what, this is actually really, really good. I've seen a
Mm.
lot of terrible motivational speeches, but that's by far one of the best ones I've ever heard. And there was the whole build up to it of the camera where he takes it slow, then he goes into it, and everyone's rip roaring mental. And I really thought there is some good writing. Yes, it's very easy to write something so simple, but for it to pay off, that could easily go wrong. Like, I just tell I'm cancelling the apocalypse. That's such a cool
Mm.
line, but it doesn't fit into his speech. Whereas in this, the whole speech is perfect. But what I like is in these films, you get these very tedious links of how everyone knows each other. I like the fact in this where Jeff Goldblum is being Jeff Goldblum, and although it's his ex that is at working at the White House, it was
Yeah.
kind of he Jeff Goldblum's his way into the White House, where he actually ends up saving their lives. And I like the Will Smith's like a pilot trying to get in NASA, stuff like that. And it linked well rather than say 2012, which is another Emmerich film where it was really pathetic. Like there was like them Russians and they climbed into the submarine type things, and you get a lot of messes. But I think this one works well, and I liked the three together, especially. I think Will Smith and Jeff Goldblum have some good chemistry towards the end when they're in the ships
Mm.
together, and I think the sort of clash of personalities kind of helps make them.
Yeah, definitely. And I was going to bring that point up actually. And also, can we just like turn Jeff Goldblum into his own verb? Like he Jeff Goldblumed his way into the White House. I love that. Um, but yeah, I completely agree with that. And sort of as I was watching this film, it started off, and I was sort of, oh, okay, this is like really formulaic, and I'm not really digging it. And it wasn't really until the final sort of attack on the UFO, sort of around the time where Bill Pullman delivers the speech. They sort of all mobilise the jets, and then they're taking on the big mothership at the end. And then you have Will Smith teams up with Jeff Goldblum, and they go their own way and like get into the ship and like wait there to detonate the torpedo. I was sort of actually really on board for it, and it's weird. Like I didn't expect to get pulled into the film as much as I did. It's not a great film, as I said. Like it was sort of. It's not like a sort of Lord of the Rings Charge of the Rohirrim moment where I'm like edge of my seat, goosebumps and everything like that. But I did get into it, so I think it is an enjoyable film in that regard. And as these kind of movies go, I think it is probably one of the best ones out there. Although I do think like overall this movie very much is a guilty pleasure. Like I wouldn't go out of my way and say that this is truly a good film. But I can see the appeal of it there. I think it is inherently all the way through a guilty pleasure film, and it's sort of when it came out '96. I know it's a bit dated now. Um, it really was sort of like a modern telling of like a '50s B movie. I think like those old UFO ones, like aliens attack Earth, humanity fights back. It struck me as a sort of not so much a homage, but it was very similar to that kind of style, I think. But it was like obviously like modern blockbuster action explosion epic when it came out.
Yeah, and I think with this, when you kind of look at it in that stance of the '90s, going back to earlier, were you saying, "Oh, I kind of liked it was one of the better ones"? I think this was one of the better ones because it was almost the first of the disaster films on a mass. 75 mil doesn't sound a lot, but in 1996, I think 75 would have been a lot higher, maybe your big blockbuster today.
Yeah.
And I think that this kind of set the standards for these films for the future. And Roland Emmerich, he's not done. I like White House Down a lot, but it hasn't. That obviously didn't. Critics didn't like it, and it didn't make that much money.
Mm.
But I think it's kind of peaked in the sense that any disaster film ever made is always going to be compared to Independence Day now,
Mm.
and it's one of
Yeah.
them that because that was almost the crown jewels. It's look saying Star Wars. Although Jaws was the first blockbuster, the the blockbuster everyone will look at Star Wars in that sense that it's got its big one that was also the first one. It's one of them where there's a lot of credit to be due in it, but I see where you're coming from the sort of '50s films where it was kind of just almost redone.
And I guess we can move into action now. There were some like side characters and stuff like that, but I think we've really covered the main ones that have the major focus in this movie. But the action scenes, and as we said, like with Jurassic Park, which came out '93, so like 3 years before this one, this was where CGI really sort of took off. It was a new thing, but they'd shown what they could do in films like Jurassic Park and sort of the capabilities of the new technology. I don't know how much of this movie like used miniatures and stuff like that. I think the White House probably was, because it didn't look, obviously, like rendering a building in those days wouldn't have looked that good. It was more for like sort of like vehicles and explosions and organic stuff like that. But really, I would say the main draw of this movie is the destruction, and you can see that in like films that come out now, like action movies like that. With a trailer, it would sell you on the destruction and the action, and I think that this is exactly what that film does. I'm not exactly sure, so don't quote me on this, but I think when the original trailer came out for this, it showed the White House explosion scene, and I think that was the factor that got everyone talking and into the cinemas to see it in the first place. And I was shocked because actually, before seeing this movie, I thought that the White House was the only building that got destroyed. Like that was a big enough, well-known building on its own to get destroyed. But it's like a 5 or 10 minute scene, isn't it? It's just like famous buildings being blown up, and it's like the entire city gets leveled almost, not just the White House. And I was shocked about that because I thought it was just the White House that got destroyed.
Yeah, and I think it was, in all credit to it, the build up to everything that happens was actually very good because although the
Mm,
ships are coming for about 20-25 minutes, they haven't really clocked on yet till Jeff Goldblum interferes. And then
mm.
it's when you've got the nutcases on the top of that skyscraper, and they're like, welcome, and the aliens just obliterate them first.
Yeah.
And then what I didn't know, yeah, you're right about the White House, because the way I thought this was going to be a film where literally alien soldiers jump out of a plane, destroy the White House, and try and kill humans. That's literally what I thought this film would be. I didn't really know it was a kind of global catastrophic nuke-like fire bombs. Do you know what I mean? It was just
Yeah,
it was different. It's exactly what I expected, but they just do it in different tones, and I think it's so outrageous and so over the top that they can get away with it. But I think, again, going back to the White House, it made sense for that to be in the trailers. Although that's the money shot of the whole film, it's what you, or in all honesty, going to see the film. If I saw that trailer today, modernised, I think, okay, they're going to blow up, say, Big Ben. I'd be a tad more interested, maybe, rather
yeah.
than something boring like, oh yeah, let's just blow up a desert. And I like the build up to it. That's another one of its credits. And even action wise, I love seeing the jets and stuff. And for 1996 CGI, that was very good.
Yeah, I was just about to say actually, there 1996 CGI. I was thinking, oh god, this is going to look a bit dated. But then, as I said, like Jurassic Park, you still watch that now, and it looks completely fine. There are a few wonky effects in it. Mostly, what I noticed was, I don't know if it was like a blue screen or a green screen. Whenever like citizens were running around in the street and you had the explosions behind them, you could obviously tell from today that that was like a rear projection or a blue screen or something like that. So those kind of effects were a little wonky, but that end assault on the mothership with all like the jets mobilized, it was really reminding me of Top Gun. It was like filmed all in magic hour, like the sun setting, so you had like the burning red orange sun and the mothership and that looked fantastic. And I do think that as an action movie itself, I do think that it would stand up to today. Obviously, when the sequel rolls out, we'll talk about it later. They're gonna, ramp up the action. There's gonna be more CGI. There's gonna be more destruction, explosions, and stuff like that. But I think that for the effects at the time, this must have been, like really next level stuff. I mean, it still looks great and all that stuff. And I don't know if you thought of this as well. See if we're on the same page here. The opening shot of the movie really reminded me of the opening shot of the original Star Wars film. It's the mothership coming over the camera,
Yeah,
and it seems never ending. And I was like, if I could put like a John Williams soundtrack on right now, this would be literally the opening shot of A New Hope.
yeah, and that's almost like every sci-fi film from the sort of 50s, 60s of invasions. It was really cool to see it because it's very easy for it to get wrong. I mean, I've seen Spaceballs, which is the Star Wars parody, and I really did not like that film. There's one or two funny things in it, but they kind of parody that opening shot, and they do it in a clever way. And I think in this one, it's not really a parody, but it's kind of like, it's really cool to see this being taken seriously again, because it's always going to be compared to Star Wars, and it works in its favour. But also with the aliens, I love the fact, although I don't understand why, that these ships are kind of hiding inside clouds for a good 30 minutes, and then they reveal it to be a UFO, which everyone knew it was because it was in the posters.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, okay, the clouds are gone. Was that like camouflage, or was that coming into the atmosphere? I don't know. But you're not meant to know. I think that's what these films are here for.
Yeah, and as I say, like with most like sort of big budget summer blockbusters like this, you're not really. It's not a film really. You're meant to think about all that stuff, is it? You're there for the action, maybe for the characters with this one, and sort of like the enjoyable sort of like funny quips and stuff like that. But and although there is comedy in this film, this one's definitely played a lot more for the action. I was just checking actually because I was curious, and it's quite interesting. Tim Burton's film Mars Attacks, which I think, in terms of obviously the material in it, is very similar, but this one has funny moments but keeps it grounded to like a global destruction from the aliens. Mars Attacks is very much a comedy on all that, and I would say a more blatant homage to like the 50s B movie kind of stuff, even down to like Danny Elfman's soundtrack. This one came out during the summer and Mars Attacks came out in December. So I think that if the tone of this had gone all out comedic and been a bit more sort of like tongue in cheek, I think that the entire point of the movie would have been missed. So as it is, I think that this film definitely strikes a good balance between the characters that we get. As I say, like it's not really in depth, character development stuff. The little nuggets you get for each character is just enough for this kind of movie, and then it balances that out with great spectacle and cinematic action. And for what it's worth, I don't know what else an audience member would be going into this film, expecting. That's exactly what the poster shows, and that's exactly what you get at the end of it, really.
Yeah, and I think in its credit, the fact it's so basically done, it works in its favour, because I wouldn't really want a film where it was sort of this sequel baiting. I know it wasn't a thing in the 90s, but they could have easily done something like it. And I
Mm.
like the fact you go in, it's simple. Aliens, oh, well, let's kill them. Earth is saved. And again, that's what your blockbuster's there for, because if they did anything intellectually, this film wouldn't have made as much money. I can guarantee you that. But also,
Mm.
I don't think people would like it as much. Like, there's a lot of sort of science stuff in it. By science stuff, I mean a computer virus. I mean, for 1996, that must have been like, I don't know, hacking like the nation's firewalls or something.
Mm.
And it's one of them. Also, one little funny thing I want to add is all the recycling stuff, because I think in 1996 you would have been a lunatic for recycling cans
Yeah.
compared to now, where it's like almost half common. So I thought
Yeah.
that was a pretty cool nod.
Recycling's the actual thing that conquered the world out of this film. But yeah, and I was going to say something, but I've lost my trail of thought. But it's okay because it'll come back to me. We'll move on to the actual aliens now, because this is a big thing I wanted to talk about. I expect most of this would be down to the part where maybe CGI hadn't exactly caught up quite as far as they wanted to get the aliens looking as realistic as possible. As such, they're done with practical effects, and I think the aliens look absolutely incredible in this film. They've got a really unique look to them, I think, and there's that scene where I guess it sort of like possesses the guy, doesn't it? It like wraps the tentacle around his throat and it's like choking him and killing him, and he's speaking through the alien. And I just thought they looked great. It's that bit where they lead the president into the room and there's like all the sort of tanks with them in, and there's something there for the actors to react with and stuff. And I think I really I hope not, but I think that the sequel is probably going to go all out CGI with the aliens now, and it's a shame because I do think they did a really good job with the look of the aliens in this and the puppets they used for it, because they could have made these things look really ridiculous like the original War of the Worlds movie or something like that.
Yeah, and I think with the aliens going into it, actually, do you know what they look like? The only thing I knew was the beam and the UFO, so seeing them was quite cool, but also their capabilities where they kind of hacked into that nutcase's mind. And you're right,
Mm.
again, with the puppets. What's going to be interesting before we go into sequel talk is, in next year's film, are they going to have practical effects? I don't know, but it'll be
Mm.
interesting to see what they can do, because they were very small aliens, although they're hiding inside the almost like armor-like things. It was they could very much replicate that easily.
Mm. And they even had like they sort of had personality. Like they didn't have like facial movements or anything like that, but like every single emotion on their face, you could tell exactly what was going on. Like the bit that comes to mind is at the end where Will Smith and Jeff Goldblum fire the torpedo, and as I say, like the alien hasn't really got a mouth that moves or like eyebrows that raise, but you could just tell that it's like shit, and then like the torpedo hits it and blows up. So I do think they did a really great job with that. Oh, also I remembered what I was going to say. Um, I don't know if this was like a clever little spin on it, but I remember before we saw this movie and we were talking about possibly doing Independence Day, or it may have been actually after you nominated it. I said that I think that the aliens are killed in the end by a virus, and by that I meant an actual virus, and you went, no, that's War of the Worlds. So I'm wondering if turning it into a computer virus was like a clever little spin on the War of the Worlds type story of
Yeah,
how they conquered the aliens.
I think it could be because when you look at it as well, the aliens are very, very, very similar. Well, to the
Yeah.
2005 ones, I haven't really seen the originals enough to
Mm.
remember them. But yeah, that's what I found interesting because when they said we'll give it a virus, I was there like, oh, the common cold.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, it can be a virus. I was like, okay. So it might have been a nod because that's the sort of stuff that Roland Emmerich does.
Mm.
But yeah, it was pretty cool looking at it that way because I didn't really know they'd do it via virus. But it's almost like a teched up War of the Worlds. Even the sort of the UFOs where they're kind of overhanging the cities, much like the War of the Worlds beings, then its beam kind of just destroys everything, just like the War of the Worlds one. So it's almost like this over the top mental 90s War of the World remake that wasn't War of the Worlds. But
Mm. Yeah, definitely. And I guess we can sort of go into overall opinions now. I did want to just bring up really quickly the music in it. The music was done by David Arnold, who I checked his credits. He's done a few other films. I think he did the third Narnia film and a few like little projects like that here and there. But when I first heard this soundtrack and it started up, it really almost sounded like a James Horner soundtrack to me. It sounded very much like Apollo 13 or something like that, to the point where I thought it was James Horner, and then the credits hit, or I can't remember. It was either the credits or I read up on Wikipedia afterwards. It was David Arnold, checked out some of his stuff, but I think that the soundtrack really worked well for this. It had the very sort of like patriotic trumpet sections for all the right bits of the film. I just thought it was. I wouldn't say it's a particularly memorable score. Like if you played like a song to me, maybe it's just because I've only seen the film once, but I wouldn't immediately say, "Oh, that's from Independence Day." But I think that the music worked perfectly for the film. I don't know if you really picked up any of the music and stuff like that, but I really did quite like the soundtrack.
it's one of them soundtracks where I think when I was watching the film, I noticed it more. However, I didn't notice it enough to talk about, if you know what I mean. But
Yeah.
it kept him beat when I think, especially when the the alcoholic guy did the sacrifice at the end, you could really hear it taking over in that. But
Mm.
it's one of them where I think you're right. It was a good one, but I just didn't know enough. Sort of coming out of it, it's not forgettable, but it's more or less the film itself where it kind of just sort of flowed over into my mind.
Mm. Oh, you spoke really quickly. I just want to bring up that scene where I think the actor's name is Randy Quaid, where he sacrifices himself. The one, whoever played his son in that control room is without doubt the worst actor in this film. Like when his dad dies, like he's going like no, no, dad or something, and you completely don't buy it. Like he's awful. I just wanted to bring that up really quickly.
He looked nothing like the dad as well. I mean, when I
Yeah.
first saw them, I thought they were just like three homeless people, like in his van. But it was kind of like, that's gonna be it shouldn't be his son. It looks nothing like him, and it looks like Adam Driver actually. So it's like young Kylo Ren.
Yeah, it does. So I guess we'll just go into overall opinions then now, and then sort of like conclude the review with speculation or what we think is going to happen in the sequel. So yeah, if you want to kick us off with overall opinions, would you recommend Independence Day, and do you think it still holds up?
I would kind of recommend it in the sense that you might love this film, you might hate this film. It's up to you to decide, but it's kind of on that list where not greatest films of all time, but on that films where like I don't know, like 1,000 films to see before you die. You see it something in there. So
Mm.
it all comes down to your personal preference of what you like, but maybe I would recommend it to someone that hasn't seen it. However, I would recommend a lot better films, especially action, especially sci-fi. Um, but I don't mind it.
Yeah, no, I'm sort of like on the same level as you really. I don't regret seeing it. I'm kind of glad I've actually seen it now because it's, as I say, it's like a dumb Summer Blockbuster that for somehow was like transcended that title and is now like an iconic film that in like its genre that you have to see. And it's really weird because it doesn't really try anything new. um it's exactly what you expect. It's completely predictable and formulaic. There's no surprises in it, but for some reason it's just sort of like achieved this somewhat iconic status amongst these kind of films. So I'm glad I've seen it. I can finally say, I've seen it. It's not one I'll probably ever go back to. If I'm with a group of friends and they're all watching it on TV, like, I'm not gonna say like, I'll turn this crap off. It's not that bad. I do still think it kind of holds up as an action movie. Like, if you've never seen it, give it a shot if you're into sort of big, loud, dumb action movies, or you love these kind of 90s disaster flicks that all came out around this time. I would definitely check it out, and chances are you probably already checked it out anyway. And lastly, I guess I would definitely recommend this movie if you're American. It's massively patriotic, and you'll probably connect with it more than like we did, for example. But yeah, like just that one scene with Bill Pullman's quote, like, "Today we celebrate our Independence Day." Like, if that doesn't get an American going, then I don't know what will. But yeah. So now we'll go into the sequel talk, which I believe comes out next year, doesn't it? Probably next summer. Independence Day Resurgence. I believe Bill Pullman and Jeff Goldblum are coming back for it, but as we said, there's going to be no Will Smith this time around. Instead, we get Liam Hemsworth. I think the plot at the minute stands on Wikipedia is that before the alien ship was blown up in the first one, they sent out a distress signal. 20 years later, reinforcements have turned up, and now they want to conquer Earth for real this time. I guess it's probably the only way you can go with a sequel, really, with this kind of film. Do I think Independence Day needed a sequel? No. But I guess there is a direction you could take it. And as I said with today, they're going to ramp up the action, ramp up the destruction, all that stuff like that. It's going to basically look like Man of Steel, really, I would say, with like the big beams coming down, like terraforming the Earth. Um, but we kind of said this with Jurassic Park, really, when we was talking about a Jurassic World review. When Jurassic Park came out, seeing dinosaurs on screen was new, and the effects were new, and it was exciting, and no one had ever seen it before. Sort of the same with these 90s action, these disaster movies that came out. This being probably the ringleader. No one had seen this level of cinematic, realistic style destruction on the screen before. And I think that's a big reason why Independence Day achieved that sort of cut above the rest level amongst these other films that came out. But nowadays, chances are any big loud summer action movie is going to have equal amount, if not more, disaster material in it than this movie did. So I don't think it's going to have that quality that's going to be fresh. If anything, it's going to look like San Andreas that came out this year. It's going to look like 2012. I don't think it's going to have anything iconic in it, that because now so many films have come out since then, disaster movies included, where they've destroyed basically every single famous landmark on the globe. So I don't think there's anything going to be in this film that's going to capture audiences. Like, it's going to capture that wow factor like this one did.
See, I'm very mixed on the sequel. I'm kind of looking forward to in the sense that I want to see what they're doing, and not in the fact that you'll have better CGI and stuff, but 20 years later, what's kind of happened with the White House? If they rebuilt the White House, where they are, it's more or less. I just kind of want to see what the president and Jeff Goldblum are doing. I know there's going to be an alien invasion. I know it's going to be cheesy as hell, but I'm just interested to see how they do it. Because you're right, it could go down that Man of Steel route, very likely. But I'm wondering if they're going to try and keep it, kind of comedic. Because if you watch White House Down, it's very much bright colours. Like, obviously they're blowing the White House, but the green is green. It's kind of that colour correction, not blatant, but very obvious Hollywood colour, rather than the deep, dark DC path. So I'm going to be interested. I think the first few trailers will probably give me the big signs of what's to come. And you're right. I don't know what they'll do like Iconic was. I think it's just going to be one of them sequels that a lot of people have waited for. And as they've kind of just announced they finished filming, I wouldn't be surprised if we got one near Christmas.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm just checking out the cast list now. It's nice that Jeff Goldblum and Bill Pullman are actually still top billing on the list. Vivica A. Fox is back as well, so that's cool. Um, And Roland Emmerich is coming back to direct it. So as you said, like White House Down, he knows this film, he created this film, so I don't think he'd willingly make a terrible sequel because clearly he knows how loved the first one is among fans and stuff like that. Um, I'm gonna remain hopeful for it, but as I say, like even with this first one, like they're not really my kind of movies now. Like back in the day, like when I was growing up, these were the kind of films I just lived for. Like I've lost count of how many times I must have watched Twister or something growing up. Um, but now I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm turning into an old codger. These movies just don't really connect with me anymore. But I'm gonna remain hopeful. I'm gonna wait for a trailer. I'm gonna see some clips that come out. So from an action standpoint, I'm sure it's gonna turn out to be fine. But I'm just concerned that there's nowhere really to go with action movies now. Like in terms of disaster, we've seen it all. CGI so can be easily done now. Like anything you can imagine, you can create on a computer. So I don't know if it's going to have that same level of connection with its audience, but we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, so that was basically our review on Independence Day. Be sure to rate, like, comment, subscribe. Let us know. Have you seen Independence Day? Do you like it? Do you hate it? Let us know in the comments below. Let's get a discussion going as we bring you more reviews in the future. You can take the conversation to us on Facebook. We're on facebook.com/cinemasavvy. We're on Twitter at cinema_savvy, and we're on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/cinema_savvy as well. So be sure to come back for our main show, where we're going to be doing another top 10 list. We're going to be doing top 10 comedies. Not going to lie, this week was quite challenging to think of something to do. There's not really much out at the cinema, so we just thought, we like doing the top 10 lists. We like telling you what some of our favourite films are, so we thought comedy is a good one to go. So that will be our top 10 list on that. And yeah, until then, thanks for listening.